The morning I found my bridge in the creek, I honestly thought a storm had taken it. Then I saw the fresh sawdust floating in the water. The clean chainsaw cuts through the beams, and Meredith Caldwell standing on my bank with her arms folded like she had just finished fixing a problem for the whole county. The only problem was that bridge was on my land. I was not part of a homeowners association, and she had no business being anywhere near it. My name is Eli Mercer, and I have lived on 46 acres outside a little town called Red Hollow, Tennessee, my whole life. My grandfather bought the place before there was a paved road out here, before anybody had a reason to call this view premium, before people started building matching houses on the ridge and acting like a mailbox with a brass number made them rulers of the countryside. The farm was never fancy, but it was ours. There was an old red barn leaning just enough to make newcomers nervous, a cattle fence my father repaired more times than I could count, and a narrow cedar footbridge over Miller Creek that I built with him one fall when I was 23. Dad did most of the measuring, I did most of the complaining, and Mum brought us bologna sandwiches wrapped in wax paper because that was about as close as our family ever got to a construction lunch. After Dad passed, that bridge became more than lumber and bolts to me. It was the fastest way to the back pasture, sure, but it was also one of those quiet things you keep because it reminds you of somebody you are not ready to lose twice. For years, nobody cared about it. Then Willow Ridge Estates went up on the hill beside my farm. At first, I figured it was none of my concern. Folks bought their tidy little houses, planted shrubs in perfect rows, and spent weekends washing trucks that had never seen a dirt road. Fine by me. I raised cattle, they raised property values, and we could all stay out of each other's way. That lasted about 3 weeks. The first letter came in a cream-colored envelope with gold trim, telling me my cows were creating excessive noise. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled coffee down my shirt. I wrote back that cows had been making cow noises for a very long time, and I was not sure what kind of silence they expected from a working farm. A few days later, another notice showed up, this one complaining that livestock waste near the fence line was affecting neighborhood cleanliness. That was when I realized somebody in Willow Ridge had looked at my farm and decided it was an eyesore standing in the way of their postcard view. Meredith Caldwell was the person behind it. She was president of the HOA, always dressed like she had somewhere important to be, even when she was just walking across grass she did not own. The first time she came through my gate, she pointed at my barn and said, "That building is hurting the appearance of the community." I told her, "Mom, this barn is older than your subdivision and twice as useful." She did not laugh. Meredith had a rule she repeated every time I reminded her that I was outside HOA boundaries. Anything visible from Willow Ridge is a concern of Willow Ridge. I told her that was not how property law worked. She smiled at me like I had just failed a very simple test. A month later, she found my bridge. She stood by Miller Creek in a bright blue blazer, staring at those weathered cedar planks like they had personally offended her. "That structure will need to be removed," she said. I told her, "No, it will not." Her smile got smaller, colder. Then she looked right at me and said, "Mr. Mercer, you are confusing ownership with immunity." I did not know exactly what she meant then, but I knew she had been waiting for a reason to come after me. And when I turned away from her that afternoon, I had the strange feeling I had just watched the first cloud roll in before a long, ugly storm. That feeling stayed with me for the next week, the kind that makes you look twice at the tree line and wonder why a truck is parked too long on the shoulder of the road. A few days after Meredith came to inspect the bridge, I noticed 2 men standing near the creek on the far side of my fence. One had a reflective vest, the other carried a clipboard, and both of them were taking pictures like they were documenting a crime scene. I walked down there and asked if I could help them. The man with the clipboard looked up, smiled too quickly, and said they were just evaluating a possible drainage concern for Willow Ridge. I told him that was interesting, because the creek had been flowing through my land for longer than Willow Ridge had existed, and I had never seen either one of them before. They left without another word. The next morning, a final notice was nailed to my gate. It said the bridge was unsafe, visually disruptive, and inconsistent with the architectural standards of the neighborhood. I stood there reading it with one hand on the gate and the other holding my coffee, thinking maybe I've finally lost my mind. My farm had nothing to do with their neighborhood. I'd never signed their rules, paid their dues, attended their meetings, or asked for their approval. Yet there it was in bold letters like somebody had decided a piece of stationery could redraw county lines. I did not respond. Looking back, maybe I should have called a lawyer then, but I had spent enough years around difficult people to know that some of them feed on attention. I thought ignoring Meredith would make her move on to somebody else. I was wrong. The morning they tore down the bridge started quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet you notice only after something breaks it. I was standing in my kitchen making coffee when I heard the chainsaws. At first I thought one of my neighbors was cutting firewood. Then I heard the sound again, deeper this time, coming from down near the creek. I ran out the back door without even putting on boots, just crossed the wet grass in socks and old jeans, and when I came around the bend, I saw 3 men cutting through the center support of my bridge. The old cedar rails were already down. Half the planks had been thrown into the water, and there was Meredith standing on the bank in that bright blue blazer, arms folded, watching them work like she was supervising landscaping at a country club. For a second I could not speak. I just stared at the bridge, at the boards my dad and I had carried down there one by one, at the place where I had sat with him after we finished it, both of us sweaty and tired and pretending we were not proud of ourselves. Then something inside me went cold. Not loud, not wild, just cold. I asked Meredith what the hell she thought she was doing. She turned toward me like I had interrupted her in the middle of a meeting. Removing an unauthorized structure, she said, I told her, "You are on my property. That is my bridge." She looked at me with that little smile and said, "It was visible from Willow Ridge, Mr. Mercer. It fell under our community safety standards." I remember looking at her and thinking, this woman has said that lie so many times she believes it is a law. I pulled out my phone and told her I was calling the sheriff. The workers heard that and everything changed. One dropped his saw, another grabbed his toolbox so fast he almost fell in the creek. Within seconds those trucks were tearing out of there, spraying gravel behind them like they knew exactly what they had done. Meredith did not run. She just stood there watching them leave, then looked back at me and said, "You are making this harder than it needs to be." I looked at the bridge floating in pieces below us and said, "No, Meredith. You already made it hard. Now you are going to make it expensive." After she left, I took pictures of everything. The fresh tire tracks, the sawdust, the broken bolts, the footprints in the mud, the clean cuts through the timber. I recorded a video walking through the whole scene, narrating every detail while it was still fresh in my mind. My hands were shaking, but I kept my voice steady. Then I called the county sheriff, and after that I called a lawyer named Nate Hollis, a man who had helped my family settle a boundary issue years earlier. Nate had one of those calm voices that made you feel like the world was less broken than it looked. When I told him what happened, he went silent for a moment, then asked me one question. "Are you part of their HOA?" I told him no. He said, "Well, Eli, that may be the dumbest thing they could have done." Deputy Frank Bell arrived about an hour later. He was a broad-shouldered man with gray hair and the patient face of somebody who had seen every kind of neighbor dispute this county could produce. But when he walked down to the creek and saw the wreckage, he stopped joking. He watched my video, listened to Meredith tell me the bridge had to be removed, and studied the tire tracks leading back toward Willow Ridge. Then he looked at me and said, "They did not have a leg to stand on, and they went ahead and cut down yours anyway." By that afternoon, Nate had drafted a demand letter. It asked for the cost of replacing the bridge, clearing the creek, and repairing the damage around the banks. It also demanded that Willow Ridge stop entering my property, stop sending false notices, and stop claiming authority over land that was never theirs. Meredith answered the next morning. She shoved the letter through my gate herself. No stamp, no lawyer, just a thick envelope with my name written across it in angry, looping letters. I opened it to the kitchen table and read every word. She said Willow Ridge would not pay me 1 cent. She said the bridge had been a hazard. She said any future structure visible from the subdivision would be subject to removal without warning. Then she added one sentence that made me sit back in my chair. "We will be conducting regular inspections to ensure continued compliance." I laughed once, but there was nothing funny about it. She was threatening to inspect land she did not own. She was telling me in writing that she intended to keep trespassing. I sent it to Nate. He called 5 minutes later and said, "Do not throw that away." She just handed us a gift. 2 days later, I found the contractor badge in the weeds near the creek. The company name was stamped on the back. So I called them. At first, the owner would not talk. Then I told him his workers had destroyed private property and fled when law enforcement was mentioned. The silence on the other end got long enough that I could hear traffic through his office window. Finally, he admitted Meredith had told them the bridge was on HOA land. She had said there was an emergency safety issue and that she had authority to approve the removal. That was the moment it stopped feeling like a petty feud. Meredith had not just crossed a line, she had invented one, handed it to a crew of strangers, and used it to destroy something that mattered to me. Deputy Bell took the contractor's statement. Nate added it to the file. Then a recording from a Willow Ridge board meeting found its way to us. Meredith was standing in front of the room telling residents that the HOA had jurisdiction over every piece of land visible from their homes. Somebody in the back said, "That cannot be right." Meredith answered, "It is right because I say it is." Nate listened to that recording twice, then leaned back in his chair and smiled. He said, "Eli, she just made this a lot bigger than a bridge." 3 nights later, I found 2 HOA board members near my fence with flashlights and a clipboard, pretending they were conducting an inspection. The next morning, a threat was tucked under my truck wiper. It said, "You have no idea who you are dealing with." But I did know. I was dealing with somebody who had mistaken fear for respect and control for authority. By the end of that week, Nate filed suit against Willow Ridge and Meredith Caldwell personally. A court date was set, and for the first time since I heard those chainsaws by the creek, I had the feeling the storm was finally moving uphill. The courthouse in Red Hollow was not much to look at. Just an old brick building with squeaky floors, a flag out front, and a lobby that smelled like coffee, old paper, and whatever floor cleaner they had been using since 1987. But on the morning of the hearing, it felt like the center of the whole county. Meredith arrived in a cream-colored suit with pearled earrings and a leather folder tucked under her arm, dressed like she was about to close a real estate deal instead of explain why she had ordered men with chainsaws onto somebody else's land. She did not look at me when she walked in. And I will admit, part of me respected the commitment it took to carry that much confidence into a room where the truth was waiting with a stack of exhibits. The rest of the Willow Ridge board sat behind her, and none of them looked nearly as comfortable. One man kept rubbing his forehead, another stared at the floor, and a woman near the end of the row clutched a binder in both hands like it might save her if things went bad. Nate started with the basics. He showed the deed to my property, the county survey, the photos of the destroyed bridge, the video from that morning, the contractor statement, Meredith's letters, and finally the recording from the HOA meeting. When her voice filled the courtroom saying they had authority over anything visible from Willow Ridge, you could feel the room change. It was not loud. Nobody gasped or shouted. It was more like everybody took the same breath and realized they were listening to a woman explain her own downfall. Meredith got up when it was her turn and told the judge she had acted in the best interest of the community. The judge, a woman named Judge Harper who looked like she had no patience for nonsense before breakfast, asked one question. What legal authority gave you the right to order demolition on land outside your association boundaries? Meredith stood there for a moment, then said the bridge was visible from the subdivision and had become a safety and aesthetic concern. Judge Harper leaned forward and said, "Visibility does not create ownership, Miss Caldwell." Meredith's mouth tightened. Then the judge asked again, "Why did you order it destroyed?" And that was when Meredith made the mistake she could not take back. She looked at the broken bridge photos on the monitor, looked at me and said, "Because it was ugly. You could have heard a penny drop." I watched the woman from the HOA board close her eyes. The man who had been rubbing his forehead let out this quiet little breath, like he had been holding it for weeks. Nate did not even need to say anything after that. The truth was sitting right there in the open. Meredith had not been protecting anybody. She had been trying to erase something that did not match the picture in her head. Then one of the board members stood up. He said Meredith had told them the bridge sat inside HOA property. A second board member said she had shown them a map with my fence drawn inside the subdivision boundary. May asked to see that map. It took Judge Harper about 3 seconds to compare it with the county records before her expression turned hard. The line on Meredith's map had been moved. Not by accident, not because of an old survey, but moved just enough to make it look like she had authority she never had. Meredith tried to say there had been a mix-up. Judge Harper cut her off. She said, "A mistake is when someone reads the wrong page. This is deception." The ruling came down before lunch. Willow Ridge was ordered to pay for the bridge, the cleanup, the damage to the creek bank, and my legal fees. Meredith was held personally liable for part of it, and the county opened an inquiry into the HOA's records and spending. When the judge brought down her gavel, Meredith looked smaller than I had ever seen her. Not defeated in some dramatic movie way, just hollow, like she had spent so long pretending to be powerful that she had nothing left once people stopped pretending with her. Outside the courthouse, a few neighbors shook my hand. One of the Willow Ridge board members came over and apologized, and I believed she meant it. She told me they were removing Meredith as president that same afternoon. Then she said something I did not expect. "We want to help rebuild the bridge." A week later, Hank from down the road, Charlie the retired engineer, and half a dozen other folks showed up at my creek with lumber, tools, coffee, and more opinions than any bridge project needed. We built a stronger bridge with cedar planks, reinforced supports, and a bench made from 2 boards we salvaged from the old one. When it was finished, kids from Willow Ridge ran across it before their parents could stop them, and the same people who once complained about my farm stood along the bank eating hot dogs and talking like they had lived beside me forever. I stood there at sunset with Ranger at my feet, listening to the creak under the new bridge, and I realized something. Meredith thought she was protecting a perfect view. Instead, she showed everybody what happens when someone mistakes control for leadership. So tell me this, because I still think about it sometimes. Was Meredith the only one responsible? Or should the HOA board have questioned her long before it got that far? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you have ever dealt with a neighbor, an HOA, or anyone who thought they could control what was never theirs, share your story too. Somebody out there might need the reminder that standing your ground does not always mean standing alone.